Our next story, Alice Kintisch, has lived in Nyack for over 40 years. Prior to telling a story at Elmwood's Porch Stories 1 in August, she had never performed at Elmwood or anywhere else. During the pandemic, she spends her time crocheting, reading, baking, cooking, and working out. Trick-or-treat season is here, and she says, chocolate, hands down. Please welcome to the porch, Alice Kintisch.
It's been said that marriage isn't always smooth sailing. I agree with that. Let me tell you why. My then boyfriend, Larry, fell in love with sailing, and I fell in love with him. He wanted a sailboat of his own so badly, so he purchased what was then a popular boat, a 10-foot long boat made out of styrofoam. That's right, what your coffee cups are made out of. It did sail, believe it or not. When we got married, we honeymooned in Bermuda. The guest house that we stayed in offered its guests a sailboat for their use. It was a 14-foot long fiberglass board boat, which meant that you had to be fairly chummy if you went out with anyone on that sailboat. It hardly had room enough for two. One late afternoon, we took the sailboat out into Hamilton Harbor. We sailed for a while, and Larry turned to me and said, Alice, how would it be if we sailed for that ocean liner that I see out moored in the harbor? I said, sure, sounds great. So we sailed, and we sailed, and we sailed, and we sailed. And we were by then fairly far from our guest house, but we really weren't much closer to the liner. By then, it wasn't late afternoon anymore, it was evening. And I may not have mentioned that board boats do not have motors or lights. Larry turned to me again and said, just a little more. We'll just go a little longer, and I'm sure we'll get close to that liner. What did I know? I was newly married. I didn't want to argue. So I said, okay. Well, you know, winds can be light and fickle. And that day, they were light and fickle. We tried every trick that we knew. We sailed with the wind, we sailed against the wind, and pretty sure it was no longer evening, it was night. We were out there in the harbor in the pitch dark. Any sailboat or any boat of any kind that came by wouldn't see us. We were sitting ducks. Well, we realized we were in danger, so we decided we'd make for the shore. Any shore. We couldn't possibly get back to the guest house. Well, we did see a dock with a light, and we were able to sail to it. We scrambled up the banks. We were in our bathing suits and our flip-flops. That's it. And we made for the nearest house that had a light on it. We knocked on the door, and a very prim and proper British woman came to the door, took one look at us, bedraggled, unhappy, sunburned, nearly naked, and said, "Shipwrecked, are we?" Yes, I guess we were. She invited us in, and we were able to use her telephone, no cell phones, of course, in those days, to call a taxi that would take us all the way back to our hotel. The next day, we retrieved the sailboat. Well, you may ask, was I afraid in Hamilton Harbor on a boat with no lights and no motor in the pitch dark? Yes, of course I was. But I was more afraid that I had made a grand mistake. I had fallen in love and married a man who was so in love with sailboats that he would take us out on a boat with no motor and no lights and let us be stranded in the dark. Well, that made me think that since this had happened on our honeymoon yet, maybe this marriage wouldn't always be smooth sailing. A few days later, uneventful days, thankfully, we flew back to New York and began life as a married couple. We've had lots of fun, laughter, love, joy, but we've also had rough seas, as any married couple would have. We've lost parents, we've lost jobs, we've had health setbacks, financial problems, trouble with children, midlife crises, and the forced isolation of the COVID months. But metaphorically speaking, since we haven't had a boat in many years now, we're still sailing together. And we recently celebrated, my sailboat-besotted husband and I, our 53rd wedding anniversary.